The hand resting on the white tablecloth was a map of everything Tomas Calder refused to say. Scar tissue ran from knuckles to wrist, the healed burn of a fire 20 years dead, and his most dangerous men went quiet when I reached for it. He closed his fist. I waited, hovering, until that scarred hand slowly opened, an invitation I could not mistake. I pressed my lips to the ruined knuckles, and for one held breath, the only sound in the room was wind against the windows. 20 years of shame lived in that hand. I kissed it anyway, not to erase anything, just to prove that I had seen it, and I was still here. For a man who had spent decades arranging the world to keep himself safe, that small act of trust was the bravest thing he had ever shown me. Then Tomas, stripped of every ounce of the power that made half of Providence afraid of him, asked the question that followed me for 6 weeks like a splinter under the skin. "Do you believe love could still choose a man like me?" I gave him an answer that night, and I meant it. I did not know then that the worst day of it would force me to prove whether I had meant it. 6 weeks earlier, I was not the kind of woman who kissed anything. I was 38. I kept the accounts for St. Bridget's Church in Providence. I took part-time shifts caring for housebound elders, and I had built my whole life around one fragile belief, that if enough people needed me, I would finally feel loved. That morning, Seth needed me for $3,000. His car had been repossessed, his commission check had somehow not landed. I sat in my small rented apartment with the unpaid electric bill tucked under a coffee mug, while Seth promised, in the exact tone he always used, that this was the last time. I sent the money because I always did. Then, because I always did when my own arithmetic refused to balance, I knelt beside my bed and whispered the prayer I had carried since I was 18. God, if I've mistaken being needed for being loved, teach me the difference. I have never spoken those words above a whisper. They were mine, one of the few things that belonged to no one else. So when I walked into the parish hall that Tuesday to meet the man funding our senior meal hall's restoration, the last thing I expected was a stranger finishing my sentence. He was 54, gray threading through black hair, still as a man rooms part 4. Tomas Calder. Everyone in Rhode Island said the name the way you read out a weather warning. His foundation had agreed to restore the aging meal hall, which meant Tuesday evenings with the woman who kept the church's books. I braced for a patron who talked down to me. While Father Benedict fussed with the coffee, I breathed my prayer, barely a whisper. God, if I've mistaken being needed for being loved, teach me the difference, Tomas Calder finished, without looking up. My hand went cold on the pen. How do you know those words? He set his papers down slowly. Not yet, he said. It was the most infuriating and intriguing answer a man had ever given me. I told myself it was research, some trick of knowing me in advance, but his eyes held no calculation, only patience. I expected the donation to arrive wearing chains, money with opinions, nameplates, and favors owed. Instead, Tomas refused naming rights for the renovated hall. He told Father Benedict, in my hearing, that the kitchen and the meal hours belonged to the parish, and he insisted the elderly guests never learn who paid for the work. If they thank me for it, he said, then I've done it wrong. But he kept coming to the Tuesday meetings, kept listening to my objections with his chin propped on his scarred hand, and kept leaving without asking for a thing. And I kept noticing small impossibilities, that he knew where an old basement doorway had stood, bricked over years before I came, that he asked whether the basement still opened as a winter shelter. One late night, I realized I had not eaten since breakfast, and there on the corner of my desk sat a paper plate with 2 sandwiches, a napkin, and an apple. He made no spectacle of it. He simply always made sure enough food waited for 2 whenever we worked late. I had spent 40 years making sure everyone around me ate first. No one had ever once done it for me. What drew me in, against every warning I gave myself, was the way he argued. We disagreed about everything that mattered: faith, guilt, forgiveness, whether a good act still counts when a morally broken man performs it. He never softened his position to please me, and when I held my ground, he looked almost grateful. "You're the first person in 20 years," he said once, "who treats my opinion like it might be wrong." If you are already asking how a man like Tomas Calder came to know a prayer I never spoke above a whisper, and why he refused to explain, then you know exactly how I felt every Tuesday night. The answer, when it came, turned out to be the least important part of this story. But before we go further, tap like and subscribe, because the truth is stranger than we knew. The people of St. Bridget's were the texture of my days. Mr. Delgado, who swore his knees predicted the weather. Father Benedict, who signed every check like it cost him something. I loved them the only way I knew how, by becoming essential to them. I did not understand yet that being essential is not the same as being chosen. Week by week, the contradiction of Tomas Calder grew sharper. He had done things I could not forgive if I thought about them too long, and one night over coffee, I told him so plainly. "You're right," he said, and the absence of any defense shook me more than an excuse would have. "I've arranged the world so my past rarely looks me in the face. This church is one of the few places it does." One evening I joked about the terrible paper cups the church had used since the Reagan administration, and something in his face closed like a door. He stared at the cup in his hand, set it down, and left without his coat. I did not know yet how close one of his ghosts came to mine. The trouble started small. Mr. Delgado's grocery received a visit from a consulting firm offering risk protection, and within a week, his produce supplier could no longer deliver. The Alvarez bakery got the same offer, and their flour shipments started going missing. A mechanic Tomas quietly protected had his insurance canceled with no explanation. Each family blamed bad luck. I was the one who noticed they had all been approached inside a single month. I brought it to Tomas without ceremony, spreading the invoices across his desk. "These businesses have nothing in common except one thing: Calder Foundation delivery schedules. Someone mapped your network." He read the names for a long time. "They're putting pressure on people because of me," he said finally. "I made them visible, and now someone's harvesting them. Every one of these owners trusts me. That trust was the one asset I never thought to guard." His voice stayed level. That frightened me more than shouting. I had expected the patterns of powerful men. Tomas offered neither comfort nor reprisal, only confession. The strange thing was what he did next. He did not send men to lean on the suppliers or intimidate the consultants. He sat with the owners in the meal hall, drank their terrible coffee, and told them the truth about who he was. Information that made him vulnerable. "I won't force you into Calder-controlled contracts," he told them. "That would make me no better than whoever's doing this." His restraint should have reassured me. Instead, it exposed how much of himself he was risking, and I saw him in a light I had no vocabulary for yet. Then, the same week the third business received its threat, my brother Seth walked into the meal hall wearing a new leather jacket and bought lunch for a table of volunteers. Seth, who borrowed money for milk. "You're flush," I said carefully. "Consulting gig," he shrugged. Company paid cash for some logistics stuff. Something cold settled in my stomach, and I hated it, because suspicion of Seth felt like betraying the only family I had left. Then Father Benedict announced that 3 community volunteers had offered to serve the noon meal. They arrived in identical dark coats they refused to take off, broad-shouldered and silent, and every elder ate faster. They were, of course, Tomas's security men, hopeless in a real kitchen, burning toast, dropping ladles, helpless before a soup pot. I organized them the way I organized everything. "If this is organized crime," I muttered. "I finally understand the staffing problem." The meal ran smoothly beneath the comedy. Tomas's men, who could have dominated the room with a look, took direction from an accounts clerk in a flour-dusted cardigan without a flicker of resentment. The elders decided they liked them. Old Mrs. Kowalski taught one to fold napkins into swans. For 2 hours we were just people feeding people. And I caught Tomas watching me from the doorway with an expression I could not name. It was after that meal, counting the invoices in my office, that I found it. Seth had access to my laptop whenever he crashed on my couch, and one schedule file had been copied to a thumb drive 3 weeks before he bought the jacket. I sat in the dark with the proof on my screen, and every excuse I had ever made for my brother collapsed, and I could not look away. I called him. He did not answer. He never answered when it mattered. He came the next morning needing a place to hide from a loan officer, and I closed the door and asked him straight, "Did you sell the schedules?" He laughed, then saw my face, then caved all at once. "Some consulting firm, Lydia. It's just logistics data. They said it was market research. You sold their maps," I said, "and businesses are hurting because of it." Seth ran his hands through his hair. "You always handle things," he said. "You always fix it." And I heard, for the first time, what a prison that sentence had been. I did not fix it. That was the moment everything changed, and I felt it happen like a bone settling wrong. "No," I said. "This time it's yours." Seth stared as if I had spoken a foreign language. When I told Tomas the truth that evening, I expected eruptions and men sent after my brother. He only listened, then said, "He's your family. The consequences are his. I won't touch him, and I won't protect him either, because you deserve to stop being his safety net." Walking me to my door in the rain that night, he asked, very gently, "You told me love is a choice, and a person must become safe enough to receive it. That answer is being tested now, and it's your own family holding the hammer." I stood in the rain and looked at the worst evidence of my life. "Yes," I said, "I still believe it, even when it hurts." His restraint undid me more than rage would have. Every man in my life had managed me through protection or rescue. Tomas was the first who protected my freedom to fail, to set boundaries, to be angry. I went home soaked and shaking and said my prayer again. For the first time in 20 years, I heard it differently. Someone was showing me the difference, one small choice at a time, and I knew I was in the worst kind of trouble, the kind that has nothing to do with danger and everything to do with hope. Hope had always frightened me more than fear did, because fear never asked anything of me. A week later, Tomas invited me to a private dinner. Not a date, he was careful to say, but an apology for the danger my brother's mistake had pulled me into. I told myself I went for the meal and wore the navy dress I saved for weddings and funerals. When the car arrived, Tomas himself opened the door, and the look he gave me made the whole evening worth any risk. His house sat on a hill above Narragansett Bay, all glass and stone and silence. The dining room held 6 people, 2 couples I had never met, and Tomas at the head of the table. The food was excellent. The conversation was not. One of the men, a compact, silver-haired figure named D'Angelo, kept studying me like a math problem he had already solved. "So," he said over the roast, "the charity case sits at the head of the table. Tell me, Tomas, is she a cause you're collecting?" The room went quiet. The couples studied their plates, and Tomas did something I had never seen him do. He only closed his left hand, the scarred one, into a fist beneath the table, as if he could hide the shame D'Angelo had just touched. I had watched this man face down enemies without blinking. That small, secret flinch told me more than any confession ever could. So, I set down my fork and reached across the table for that closed hand. He went absolutely still. I did not grab it. I waited, fingers hovering over his knuckles, until he slowly, deliberately, with the whole room watching, opened his fist and placed his scarred hand in mine. I lifted it and kissed the ruined skin. Not to fix him, not to forgive his past, just to tell him, in the only language he trusted, that I had seen the shame and I was not running from it. Whatever those people thought of me now, I did not care. Some doors only open once, and I was not going to walk past this one. The couples excused themselves. We sat alone, his hand still in mine because neither of us moved. When he spoke, his voice had changed, stripped of command, younger, afraid. Do you believe love could still choose a man like me after everything you know about what this hand is and what it's done? I did not answer with poetry. I believe love is a choice, and becoming safe enough to receive it is a choice too. He looked at me for a long time, and I watched something in him decide to trust that answer. And I have to stop here and ask you something, because this is the moment I still turn over at 2 in the morning. Do you believe love can choose a man like that? A man who has done real harm, who carries a scarred hand and a worse history? Tell me honestly in the comments. The answer I gave was the easy part. Proving it was the hard part. After that night, something between us changed shape. He began calling at the end of his days, not about the accounts, just to hear about the meal hall, the weather, the cat who lived behind the rectory. Once, late, he told me he had not let anyone touch the scarred hand in 20 years. Every hand that touched it afterward wanted something from it. You touched it, and you wanted nothing. I didn't know that was still possible for a man like me. But outside that thin, bright room, the pressure kept building. The consulting firm went quiet for a week. Then the mechanic's warehouse mysteriously flooded, and his insurance paid nothing. A restaurant 2 blocks from the church lost its liquor license over a paperwork error no one could explain. Every failure came with a calm, polite phone call. Accept our risk protection, and the trouble stops. I started carrying the owner's file folders in my bag like a second nervous system, and I knew how to trace a caller because I had spent 2 decades caring for people who trusted the wrong ones. The invoices led to a consultancy called Meridian Risk Advisors. The signature on the master agreement belonged to Camille Arden, and when I said that name to Tomas, the color left his face the way a tide leaves wreckage. Camille, he repeated. We were engaged 20 years ago, the week before the fire that did this. He told me the rest in pieces, like splinters. Camille had been brilliant, a consultant even then, and after the fire she came to his hospital bed and offered him another life. No organizations, no debts, no world that kept burning pieces of him away. He chose his dead father's empire instead. And now she's back, I said, strangling the people you love. He shook his head. Camille doesn't want revenge on me. She's too precise for that. Something lodged in me then. A woman who had watched his philanthropy for 20 years from the outside might see the donations and the meal hall as pure performance. She might want to prove a belief she had carried since the hospital, that when the bill came due, Tomas Calder would choose power over people. Camille Arden came to see me 2 days later, and it was nothing like the scene I had rehearsed. She was elegant in a way that made my navy dress feel like a costume, and she asked politely if she could sit with me while I ate. She never mentioned jealousy, never mentioned Tomas and me at all. She talked about suppliers, insurance, delivery windows, and I understood with a chill that I was simply the most useful place to observe from. You've heard the rumors that I'm a jilted woman. I don't correct them. They're convenient. What are you actually doing? I asked. She smiled the way a surgeon smiles at a clean incision. 20 years ago, Tomas chose an empire over a life, and he has spent 20 years decorating that choice with generosity and calling it redemption. I intend to show him what his choice actually costs when the bill arrives. I should have walked away. Instead, I asked, and if he chooses differently this time? Her smile did not falter. He won't. People don't change, Lydia. They only develop better arguments for staying the same. She left a card with a date, 1 week away, and the name of the Concord Consortium. I understood then that she had built her test the way a locksmith builds a lock, to admit exactly 1 key. The week stamped on that card arrived the way bad weather arrives, announced, and then worse than announced. Mr. Delgado's grocery lost its third supplier. The mechanic's roof sprang a dozen leaks at once. Every new failure came with the same polite phone call, and every owner called me because I was the one who had promised them Tomas would stand with them. Then the offer came. The Concord Consortium, 3 families stronger than Calder's, wanted Tomas's logistics network for themselves, and they offered him a seat at their table. Sign this, and the businesses you protect stay protected. By them, the small ones become their problem, not yours. You keep the empire. I learned that night that the word empire was a religion to some men. Tomas read the agreement twice, and for the first time since I had known him, I watched him calculate. He was not threatened, that he could face. This was arithmetic. How much power to keep, how much trouble to buy off, how many men would stay loyal if he refused. D'Angelo saw the hesitation too, and pressed harder into the silence. I did not wait to be noticed. I set the folder I had carried for 6 weeks onto the table between them. The agreement requires you to abandon the guarantees. Every owner you promised, they'll be left alone against the firm. D'Angelo laughed. First a charity case, now a lawyer. Tomas looked at me, not at him. Go on, Lydia. I talked for 20 minutes straight, more than I had ever commanded a room in my life. I had spent my nights with the church's vendor ledgers, and what I found was the thing neither Camille nor the consortium had bothered to see. The threatened businesses already bought overlapping goods, ran parallel routes, needed the same insurance, suffered the same squeezed margins. A cooperative. They pool their orders, share deliveries, negotiate insurance together, buy through St. Bridget's long-standing vendors. Legitimate suppliers, honest prices. They stop needing Calder exclusivity, and they stop being reachable by anyone who thinks they own them. I spread the numbers across the table. It works without you. The room went quiet enough to hear the bay. Then D'Angelo said, very softly, the exclusivity is yours to release, Tomas. You're the one who has to give it up. And I saw the real shape of the trap Camille had built. She had not forced Tomas to choose between empire and people at all. She had made it so the people could only be saved if Tomas voluntarily made himself weaker. Every escape route she had not closed had already been closed in advance by his own past. The meeting with the consortium was set for Friday, 4 days away, and Tomas spent them like a man before open-heart surgery. He met the owners himself, one by one, in the meal hall, and told them the truth, what he had done, what was being offered, what he stood to lose. Then he asked their permission to be their partner instead of their protector, because protection, he said, was only a leash with better marketing. On Thursday night, he came to my door in the rain, and we stood under the dripping eave like 2 people at the edge of a war. If I refuse them, I lose the alliance, the exclusivity, and half my own organization. D'Angelo will walk, and he'll take men with him. There is a version of my life where this ends with me being nothing. Nothing, I said, is a strong word for a man who knows how to open his hand. Friday arrived cold and bright. The consortium sent 3 representatives. Camille came with them, elegant and unreadable, and sat at the far end of Tomas's table, like a judge taking her seat. The owners filled the chairs along the wall, Mr. Delgado in his good coat, the Alvarez sisters holding hands, the mechanic with a folder of his own. Everyone understood this was a trial, and the verdict belonged to one man. The consortium's lawyer laid out the terms without sentiment. Sign, and the empire continues. Refuse, and they would review every Calder contract. Camille watched Tomas with the patience of a woman who had waited 20 years to be proven right. And Tomas Calder, 54 years old, scarred hand flat on the table, said, I refuse. The word fell into the room like a stone into still water. D'Angelo stood, chair scraping the floor. You're handing the organization to a bookkeeper. I'm handing it a future it can be proud of, Tomas said, which is more than it's had since my father built it. He slid the agreement back across the table. Tell the consortium my exclusivity is void. The businesses are free. If they want a war with me, they should have made better terms. Camille did not move. She sat with her hands folded over her folder while the consortium gathered their papers, and when the room had emptied to the three of us, she finally spoke. 20 years I waited to watch you choose power. You were supposed to choose power. I did, Tomas said. Every day for 20 years. You're looking at the first day I didn't. It turns out the view is better from here. Then I built my cage for a man who no longer exists. I spent 2 decades telling myself people don't change. You're the evidence they can, and it has cost me my best belief. She left her folder on the table. The firms will stop. You have my word, such as it is. I believed her, which surprised both of us. The cooperative launched 6 weeks later, out of the church basement, with Father Benedict's blessing and the goodwill of parish vendors who had known St. Brigid's for 60 years. Orders pooled, deliveries consolidated, insurance negotiated by a committee of owners who had learned late in life that they were stronger together than afraid apart. Tomas kept no controlling share, took no fee, put no name on anything. It would flourish or fail on its own merits. The only kind of gift, he told me once, that was not a leash. He asked for no credit, no gratitude, no name on any door, and that silence told me more about the man than every confession he had ever made. But the truest test was still waiting for me at home, in the shape of my brother. Seth came to my apartment the morning after the signing, with an eviction notice in his hand, and my name already arranged on his face like a key sliding into a lock. And I said no, not coldly, just no, for the first time in our shared life. You've come to me needing money for 30 years. This time, I need you to need yourself. His anger was immediate and familiar. He called me a coward and 6 other names that had always worked before. You always handle things, he said, exactly as he had said it in the meal hall weeks earlier, and I realized he had no other sentence for me. That's done, I said. Sign the repayment agreement. Pay the people who lost money because of what you sold. I'll be here when you're done, not before. He left, I cried after he did, because boundaries are a small death every time, even the right ones. But I did not call him back, and I did not reach for my phone the way my whole body wanted me to. For 30 years I had believed that holding my brother together was the same as loving him. I was finally learning the difference. Seth did not call for 3 weeks. When he did, it was not for money. He came to the church with a folded bank statement and showed me, without a word, the first payment he had made toward the debt, smaller than a grown man's rent, larger than any gift he had ever given me. They told me what the schedules did, the businesses, the old people eating dinner at my sister's church. I sold their piece for a leather jacket. He kept his eyes on his shoes. I'm going to pay it all back. I don't know how long it takes. Then pay it back, I said. And when you're done, we'll talk about what family means besides a key to someone's lock. It was not forgiveness, and I did not pretend it was, but for the first time in my life I watched my brother carry his own weight. Being needed had kept me tired. Being free of it kept me honest. Camille left the state quietly, and Tomas let her go without a single act of revenge. He ended every Calder relationship with her firm, and when someone asked whether he wanted her punished, he said, "She spent 20 years building a test for a man I used to be. That's punishment enough." The Sunday after the cooperative's first profitable month, Tomas asked me to meet him at St. Brigid's after evening mass. Not the office, not the meal hall, the basement. The restored hall smelled of fresh paint and floor wax. Father Benedict had gone home, and the old side doorway, bricked over before my time, stood uncovered again, framed in new wood, leading nowhere but into memory. 20 years ago, this building was a winter shelter. A fire at the foundry had taken my hand, and taken something else I didn't have a name for yet. Camille had offered me a life, and I had chosen the empire, and I sat in that corner, with a paper cup, and wished I'd chosen the fire instead. I came here because nobody in this neighborhood knew my name. I just wanted one night of being nobody. And a girl came and sat beside me, 18 years old, all elbows and courage, helping her mother serve. She didn't ask who I was or what I'd done. She asked if I believed in anything. I said I used to, and she told me the prayer she carried. Not preached, just told me. God, she said, if I've mistaken being needed for being loved, teach me the difference. I never learned her name. I have never forgotten the words. The room went still, the way rooms do when the past stops being a story and becomes a door. That was me, I said. The shelter, the paper cups, the girl with the prayer. You were the only person in my life who sat beside me when I was nothing and wanted nothing back. For 20 years I sent money to this church, anonymously, always, because putting my name on it would have made it debt. 20 years of winter shelters, and a girl holding a paper cup who once told his soul it was not finished. I had spent those years certain I was the one who gave. He had spent them proof that someone had been keeping me. And when you walked in and whispered those words, he said, I knew I had been waiting for you since I was 34. And I knew that if I told you, then every kindness afterward would feel like repayment, gratitude, destiny dressed up as love. I wanted one thing in my life that neither fear, nor money, nor history, nor fate could manufacture. So I said, not yet. I kept saying not yet, until you had chosen me freely, or chosen not to. Either way, it would be yours, and not borrowed from my past. I did not answer. I could not, yet. I asked for time. Days, I said. Maybe more. And he gave it the way he gave everything in the end, without reaching, without bargaining, without once trying to make the waiting easier for himself. I went up into the sanctuary alone and knelt in the dark, and I said the prayer again, out loud this time, the whole prayer, to a God I could finally hear answering. Teach me the difference, I whispered, and the difference came to me at last. Seth always needed me and called it family. A dozen other people needed me and called it their love language. But Tomas could have made himself indispensable to me, could have told me the truth early and let gratitude choose for me. And instead he protected my freedom to leave, then waited for me to walk back. Needing is a hand that takes. Choosing is a hand that opens and waits. If you have ever spent your life being needed and wondered whether that was the same thing as being loved, that is this story. Tap like and subscribe so more stories like it can find you. And tell me in the comments, do you think she was right to make him prove it, or should she have run to him the moment she understood? I was 40 years learning the difference. You can argue with me in the comments for free. 3 nights after that, I went to him. No one summoned me. I drove up the hill and knocked on his door, and when he opened it, I did not explain anything. I just walked in and sat beside him where the light from the water fell across his hands. He looked at me, and neither of us spoke, because everything that needed saying had been proven already. I reached for the scarred hand. It rested on his knee, and I paused, the way I had paused at that dinner table, the way he had taught me, because permission is the whole language between us. He opened it slowly and placed it in mine. I lifted it and kissed the ruined knuckles one more time, and he did not ask whether love could still choose him. He did not have to. My hand in his was the answer, and it had already said yes. Later he told me he had built the house full of windows because he had spent 30 years in rooms with no light. And I thought about the girl in the shelter with her paper cups and her stubborn prayer, and the man who had carried her words for 20 years without ever once using them to claim her. The prayer I had carried since I was 18 finally has its answer. Seth needed me, and I learned to love him without being his safety net. The church needs me, and I have learned to serve without disappearing. And Tomas Calder, who could have owned me in 100 ways, chose instead to hand me the one thing he had never given anyone: his open hand. Being needed is not the same as being loved. I know the difference now. He opened his hand the way he had opened that shelter door 20 years ago, and this time I did not sit beside him because my mother asked, or because a stranger needed comfort. I sat beside him because I chose him, scarred hand, hard history, and all. The way he had chosen to become someone safe enough to be chosen. And somewhere above the bay, I said my prayer one last time, and it sounded like thank you.